There's a question that lives inside nearly everyone struggling with marriage. It doesn't always get said out loud. Sometimes it sits in the car on the way home from therapy. Sometimes it shows up in the shower at 6 in the morning. Sometimes it arrives in a text from a friend who finally asks, "Are you okay?" The question is this: should I keep trying, or is it time to let go? And that question is one of the hardest questions a human being can sit with because the stakes are enormous. Your identity, your family, your children, your financial future, your sense of whether you gave it everything you had. Today's episode is about that question, not to answer it for you, because no one can do that, but to help you think about it more clearly, more honestly, and with more wisdom than fear. Welcome to the Conscious Divorce Podcast on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. I'm Justin Milrad, your host. I'm a certified divorce coach, author, and the founder of Reclaim and Reboot Transformational Coaching. I should tell you up front that I'm not an attorney, I'm not a therapist, and I'm not a financial advisor. What I am is someone who's walked through divorce personally, who coaches people through it professionally, and who believes that one of the most important things we can do in any crisis is to replace panic with clarity. This may be one of the most important distinctions you ever understand if you want to heal, co-parent well, and build the life you're proud of, whether that life includes rebuilding this marriage or moving forward without it. My guest today is Dr. Lee Baucom. Lee is a PhD, marriage therapist, relationship coach, and the creator of Save the Marriage, which includes a podcast with over 600 episodes and millions of downloads. His work centers on a powerful idea that many marriages in crisis are actually salvageable, that one person can begin shifting that dynamic, and that most people are focusing on the wrong things when they try to fix what's broken. He challenges the idea He challenges the idea that more talking automatically equals better relating. He draws a sharp distinction between what he calls a navigation failure and a destination failure. And he does all of this without being simplistic or dismissive of the pain people are in. Lee, welcome to the Conscious Divorce Podcast.
Oh, Justin, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great to have you. So let me start here. You've worked with thousands of couples and individuals. You've done this for over 30 years. And one of the things that really struck me about your work is that you seem to think that most people misdiagnose what is actually wrong in a distressed marriage. You talk about this idea of a navigation failure versus a destination failure. Can you please unpack that for us?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is the real issue, and so let's compare what happens when people come in and they tell me what's wrong with their marriage. And as they outline it, they're actually telling me the symptoms of the underlying problem. And because of that, they're trying to solve the wrong thing. They're trying to address the wrong issue. The wrong issues include things like fighting about money, fighting about parenting, feeling like they're roommates, feeling like their ship's passing in the night, even that they are overly attached to other things or other people. Those are all symptoms of this underlying issue, which is disconnection. I call it hitting the pause button, and it's an accidental thing that people do. They hit the pause button thinking they're going on to do other things, and the disconnection that builds up from there is what actually creates all of these symptoms. Like people tell me, I've got communication problems with my spouse. No, the communication isn't it. It's that disconnection.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, a lot of people are rowing harder when the boat is pointed in the wrong direction, and they're putting enormous effort into something, but the effort's almost always misapplied. So you also challenge the idea that more communication is automatically the answer. You talk about connection over communication. I think this is really important because a lot of people come to me after they've talked a problem to death and still feel completely unheard. What are they usually misunderstanding about what is actually needed?
Yeah, so communication is a delivery device. That's all it is. We are delivering something. And so the question I always ask the couple is, what are you delivering? Are you delivering the disconnection, the hurt between you, or are you delivering connection? And so if you're trying to communicate more, but you're doing it from disconnection, from alienation, then you're not ever solving that underlying issue. So I watch couples as they have long conversations about the finances, about the parenting, about those issues that we talked about. And there are a handful of them really, that end up being the bulk of those conversations. And they're never addressing the disconnection. They're always trying to address this symptom. And so then when they think that they have a communication problem, it's what they're delivering in that communication. So the only way to get past that is to work on the connection rather than trying to have more communication.
Sure. And I'm sure you're very familiar with John Gottman and the Four Horsemen. So I'm just kind of curious, how do the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse and the connection piece kind of work in tandem to improve the situation in a relationship?
Yep, that's what he named are four symptoms of pretty severe disconnection. And when you're hitting that point, you're hitting the deeper levels of disdain. And for me, I have this arc of connection. And then if people don't navigate that and continue that connection, they have an arc of disconnection. So the point where we are attracted to somebody, to the point where we commit to somebody, and then the disconnection that happens because you hit the pause button and you're trying to do these other things ends up creating distance. And that distance, as it increases, includes things like disregard and disinterest, disrespect, and finally disdain. And then the four horsemen are symptomologies of when you're approaching that disdain. The one that is misunderstood is stonewalling. People think that that is the fault of the person who's doing the stonewalling, instead of seeing that stonewalling is what we do when we're flooded emotionally. And if you look at Gottman's research, he says that if somebody is stonewalling, you need to recognize the flooding and back up some and try to go at it a little bit differently. But all of those are pointing to the fact that the relationship has hit that point of disconnection and the pain that comes out of that, to the point that you can't navigate the emotional field any longer.
That's so helpful. I want to cover a piece of your framework that I think is really important. You talk about three things that are foundational to a healthy marriage: belonging, mattering, and emotional safety. Can you walk us through why those three things are the actual operating system, not just the surface level complaints that people bring into therapy?
This is hitting the deepest levels of our humanity. We all have a deep need to matter, and it really goes way back to the point when if we didn't matter to the people in our lives, we wouldn't survive. And so that deep level of mattering is so deeply held by us that when we are in this significant relationship, and I think most people, even in a troubled relationship, would say that in marriage itself is the most significant adult relationship we have. It has the most potential for how we go through, because we're basically melding our life to somebody else. And so that piece of the journey being a joint journey means that this person's opinion is more deeply rooted in us than any other. And so if we feel like we don't matter to our spouse, and many times when I watch troubled relationships, neither one feel like they matter, that they don't belong. So now let's pull in another piece of the belonging versus fitting in, because one of the strategies I see people do in a relationship is try to fit in to what they think their spouse wants. But that leaves you feeling like you're not being yourself. Belonging means that you're accepted, that you're a part of the process. And so we put those pieces together. When I know that I matter to somebody, when I matter to my spouse, that fits this very deep need we have. And if it's not met there, we will look for it elsewhere. We will find that somewhere that makes us feel like we matter. And then the question is, do we feel like we belong, that we're accepted for who we are? Years ago, I started talking about the fact that the two things that people really need is to feel wanted and accepted. And that's the heart of this mattering issue that it's kind of gotten that label lately, but that's what we're talking about. Do I feel wanted versus unwanted or needed? Needed doesn't really fill that need. It's just like there's something that's being pulled from me. So that, am I wanted and am I accepted versus feeling unaccepted? And when we are not creating that in our relationship for our spouse, it's already on thin ice. We need to feel like we matter.
That is so, so important. And I think it's so relatable for so many of us. So this podcast is called The Conscious Divorce. And I just want to be clear, while I'm a divorce coach, I'm also a marriage coach. And, I don't automatically, when a relationship is in a toxic or a rocky, on a rocky road, say go to divorce. If there's any opportunity to save that marriage for so many reasons, that's where I kind of, default to. So,
Mhm.
let me ask you the question, Dr. Lee, that I think half our audience is holding their breath waiting for. Can one person really start saving a marriage even when the other person is checked out?
So you added a very important word there, and that's the start. Can they start the process? One person can change the system, and a marriage is a system. Think about it as a dance, right? We have two people who are doing the dance, and this is where many people kind of challenge me. They'll say, "Oh, you think one person can do this? Well, it takes two to tango." And my response is, "You're already tangoing. That's already going on.
Hmm.
That's started. So the question is, do you like the dance that you're doing, right? Do you like how it's happening, or would you rather change your steps? Now, if you're in the middle of a dance, you can't control what steps the other person uses. You can choose your new steps. And when you do that, you change the system. And when you do that, you often create the conditions for repair to happen. And so one person can start that process. Let's take it a step further, though, and answer the obvious question. Can you finish it on your own? No, it takes two to join together in that process. So, what we're talking about is the start of the process, which is incredibly important because many people feel like they're in this relationship and they just can't do anything because the spouse is checked out. The spouse may be unwilling to see there's a problem. The spouse may already have a foot somewhere else, right? And the question is, are they stuck? And the answer is no. They can change their steps of that. They can change how they interact differently, how they enter into that process, how they show up into the process. And when they do that, it changes the system. Then we have to see how that paces out.
I think that's very relevant on so many levels. And also, when you see your partner doing the work, after a while, especially when you didn't think they would ever, do the work, then hopefully the other spouse opens up and welcomes, the work and participates together. And
So let me add one piece in of why this can work.
please.
We talked about this a little bit about the significance of the marriage relationship and the importance of belonging. But we humans are deeply in need of connection. That is also rooted in our, just all of our DNA. In fact, we are probably the most connecting of all creatures on the earth. We have different ways of doing it. My dog understands physical connection. Humans go far beyond that because we can talk about what happened last year and we can talk about what's going on right now. And I can ask how someone feels and they can respond. So we have this verbal capacity for building that connection. And since we need that connection so badly, if it's been cut off in a marriage and then it starts coming back, it starts feeding a need that many people often had forgotten about. That it's kind of like scratching the itch they didn't really know was there anymore.
Sure.
And then they are brought back in because they also want that connection. We are just connecting creatures, and that's the road path. That's why sometimes you can get past the resentment and the hurt because that connection is so important.
One thing I hear from clients often is one of the spouses says, I'm done. And these two words feel like a death sentence. What do those words actually mean? And what do they not necessarily mean?
So there is the possibility that what it means is I'm done, like I am out of here, right? That is a possibility. It's always an emotional response, though, right? And that's often what people miss. They think there's a decision that's been made, and it's actually an emotional response that someone's giving to the fact that they no longer see a path forward. That is what I often see lacking for people. It's kind of what I've built my career on, of creating the maps of how to go somewhere, because if you don't know how to get there, you're going to have a very hard time finding the path. There's the hope equation that says that there are three things you have to hold on to hope and action. And the first one is knowing where you want to go. And a lot of people have a hard time even with that. So that's figuring out, what do you want this marriage to look like? The third piece is the willingness to do it. Am I willing to do the work? The one that most people are missing, though, is the how to do it, the map, the how to do that. And so I'm done can be, I no longer can figure out where to go. The I'm done can be, I'm no longer willing to do that. And the I'm done is, I have no idea how we would even do that. So I'm done sometimes truly means that. But a lot of times it just means, I don't know what else to do here. I'm out of ideas, and I'm out of desire to do that.
Yeah, I'm frustrated. What happens next? So, what should people stop doing immediately when they realize their marriage is in trouble? And what are the instinctive responses that actually accelerate the collapse?
Yeah. So one of the things that often happens in the midst of that is people go from 0 to 60 in a heartbeat, and so they start chasing. And the chasing, I call it the chaser spacer dynamic. And you're trying to be the pacer. So back to my dog that's beside me. If I'm in the backyard and I need her to come back to me, the mistake I could make is going after her. And because that begins to be a game for her. That's fun for her. In a marriage, it's not a game, it's not fun, but it's distance. It's keeping a safe space, which is exactly what she's doing. Can I stay just out of reach of this person who's coming after me? Which means if I go faster, she goes faster. And so the just out of reach dynamic is one that is caused by the I'm pursuing my spouse. I'm trying to convince them. I often tell people to, if you find yourself trying to make, cause, convince, those kinds of thoughts, my spouse, to do something, you need to back away from that. So don't try to force it. You're trying to invite it instead. And many times that they feel like they need to do more. So they keep stacking it. I'll give somebody suggestions. I go, okay, I need more though. What do I do more of that? And sometimes it's not the more. Sometimes it's doing the consistent and building up, making the deposits into that connection account until you're no longer withdrawn. And that's where most couples find themselves when they're in trouble. They're withdrawn on that. And so we're trying to get it back on slow deposits, trying to get it moving in the positive direction until they're willing to step back into it.
So let's assume that someone has stopped the bleeding and they're no longer making the mistakes or doing the things that really frustrate their partner. What are the signs that a reconciliation is genuinely possible? What should people be looking for?
Sometimes I think that there's a danger of looking for that. People get caught up in micro-analyzing their spouse. So it's almost like they're making the wrong calculation. Their calculation is, I'm waiting for the sign from my spouse. And then they start to adjust their actions based on that rather than being consistent. So if they don't see action, they suddenly get desperate and start chasing harder, or they back away completely when that's not within their control, right? They're basically making a calculation on the wrong thing. Back in college, I had a roommate that was really wanting to have a girlfriend, and he would constantly report the interactions. And he'd say, that's a positive, right? And I would go, well, that's a non-negative. Let's keep it in that category. It's a non-negative. I don't know what it meant, but it's not negative. So that's the same in this. Many times people will try to tell me, my spouse did exactly this. Is that a positive? I'm like, instead of getting caught up in the minutia of their reactions, let's stay constant and consistent in your approach. That said, there is often a point when a spouse stops reacting the same way, starts engaging differently. And those are the non-negatives that give you some clues about the process. You just don't want to be banking on that. You want to make sure that your approach is to do what you can within the limits of what you're willing to do, within the limits of the time frame you're willing to do it, to see if you can begin to repair the damage that's been done from the disconnection.
Thank you. So this is a big one, and I know it's on a lot of listeners' minds, but I want to address infidelity directly. Mm-hmm. Can a marriage survive infidelity, and what determines whether it can or can't?
Yeah. So I see lots of couples survive infidelity. There is a reset to this. Infidelity, with some exceptions, is a symptom of the disconnection. We humans, as we have already said, are needing connection. And so if we're not getting it one place, it's not like we just sit on that. It it's like it morphs to somewhere else. And so I see people who are finding their connection through over involvement with their kids or with their career or with their friends or with somebody else. And those are all ways they're trying to meet that connection need. So two things have happened in an infidelity. And let's, I hate to use the term typical, but let's use that typical infidelity. So I'm taking that away from the people who have addictions and they're acting out their addiction through infidelity. So if it's not that, it's often because they feel the disconnection and they begin to find it somewhere else. There's a nurture that's going on there. So first of all, we have disconnection, and it takes both people to be in a disconnected relationship. And then the second piece is somebody did not hold the boundaries, and they are responsible for that. We're still looking though at the beginning point of this. And so many people can step back and say, wow, I was a part of that disconnection too. That's why we were vulnerable. We have to repair the disconnection and then repair the boundaries also.
Thank you. I know how complicated infidelity is, and I honor those who are able to move through it, and those professionals like you who can help people do that. So we're going to jump to a quick commercial, and then when we get back, we're going to be talking about when staying becomes harmful. And we're back. So my next question is, when does hope become denial? And, what does hope look like that's actually grounded versus hope that is keeping someone trapped? Because not all marriages can and should be saved. So I'm grateful for your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think there is a difference between hope and wishful thinking, and that's kind of what you're talking about. Hope is denial when it's not paired with action, with feedback, and with adjustment. I mean, those are what I'm looking for. And so when we talked about that hope equation, those three pieces are easy ways of asking what's not there. Wishful thinking of am I just gonna just hope that things get better? And I'm seeing in front of me a lot of issues that I'm not addressing. Do I have those three pieces? Do I know where I'm going to go? Am I willing to do it? Do I have a way to do that? Those three pieces have to be there. When we're just like waiting on the sidelines, wishing it would happen, then at that point it is denial. And I think there are times when somebody has to be realistic and say, I actually have done the work. Like I'm clear about where I wanted to go, and I'm clear about my willingness to do it, and I've done the work. When they have to perhaps decide on reassigning where they're headed. And so they may realize that they've kind of run out of runway on that, and they have to look elsewhere for a new destination. I have had people who I can say have done everything possible, but then continue. And at that point, they're in a bit of denial.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. So here's a question I'm very curious about how you would handle in your practice. And I think it's a question that is unexplored. So how does someone know whether they're trying to revive a real relationship or grieving an imagined one? Because sometimes the marriage people are fighting to save is not the marriage they actually had. It's the marriage they believe they had, or the one they needed it to be. So grateful for your thoughts.
Yeah. So I'm often thinking, I really think kind of the better question is there any responsiveness that's still there? Right. So Many times people are kind of imagining, and we talked about these little things that people will read in, but is there any true openness, any shift we see, or any influence that's coming from the other person? Is there some place that you see a change as you're trying to influence the change? Can you see some piece of that? Um, and so that is an important kind of measurement of where is the reality of this relationship. Um, Many times people are, I mean, we all have imaginations of what a relationship should be, and for some of us, it's even what it is. You know, we're unwilling to look at the problems in it, and that is the imagined relationship. But if somebody has clarity in them, if they're really looking at what's going on, I'm always asking the question, is there any responsiveness? Are you seeing any signs of life? It doesn't take much, but are there some signs of life still there? Are there still interactions with you? Are there still warm moments? Are there still moments of this connection, cooperation that you can begin to enlarge on?
Something that comes up often is, I want to work on the marriage. I want to go to therapy. My spouse doesn't believe in therapy. They refuse coaching. They don't want any sort of engagement at all and kind of hope that the marriage will fix itself. What do you say to the spouse who's really working hard and trying while the other spouse is just kind of drifting in the relationship?
Yeah, and which is the common place that people start. And so that is a pretty typical starting point, and even a while into that. It does take a while, as we talked about those deposits, for them to add up to the point when the other person kind of comes around and sees that there's a possibility. Part of that is that there are habits in place. And when we are in automatic response mode, sometimes we're responding even if the other side is doing differently, right? So somebody can decide they're going to be in an interaction differently, and the other person is still running the old tape. And it takes a while for that old tape to run itself out. And so when you're waiting for that, it's often the case that you're not seeing a lot of movement. And it's often the case that it feels like that for a while. I often kind of use the analogy of it's now spring, so things are bursting forth, and we have some bulbs outside, and you can look at them and you're watering them, you're taking care of them, and nothing's happening. But that doesn't mean that nothing's happening. It's just underneath the ground. There's something invisible that's happening, and finally it kind of bursts forth. And you've got to ask the question of, have I done enough to make sure that what could happen underground can happen? And have I done enough in the relationship? Have I deposited enough in that connection relationship to begin to turn things? Am I consistent in my behavior, or do I slip up and go back to those old tapes, which are just kind of verifying that nothing's really changed? Am I making a real change in how I'm showing up? And when we do that, then what we're waiting for is for them to re-engage. It is possible, no doubt about it, that you can do everything you can and still have somebody not respond. My suggestion is you think that in the short term, that is likely to be the case. I'm not likely to see the growth. And so I have to make sure I'm continuing to deposit. And part of my question is, how withdrawn are we on this connection thing? How disconnected are we? How deep does it go? For some people, it goes back years, if not decades. And so that's a pretty overdrawn account that we're trying to deposit into to see if there comes a point when we're starting to gain, that our investment begins to show up.
Sure. Let's switch to a really important topic, which are the children. So often people say, "I'm staying for the children," and in some cases, that's true, and the marriage can still be rebuilt. But in other cases, the children are actually experiencing two people living in chronic misery, which represents what a model of marriage that really isn't healthy. So what should people understand about staying for the kids versus leaving for the kids? And in your opinion, when it comes to kids, what's the right decision?
So I want to just kind of point to the dichotomy that I often hear when people put this of stay for the kids and be miserable, or leave and find something different. And the other option is to stay for the kids and work on it, because the kids do matter. But kids don't just need married parents. Kids need emotional safety, they need stability and low conflict. Research shows that that is how kids stay healthy. So staying in misery isn't the answer. That can do more harm than leaving well. But is there another option? And so is there motivation? We know pretty clearly that kids do well when they come from loving married homes. That is a piece, if they're in a married family. And one of the things I often point to people is for them to recognize that no matter how things are, that is normal for the kids. And so if you go to divorce, you're taking what they have known as the frame of their life and changing it suddenly, and that has its impact. It doesn't mean it's detrimental to kids, but it does have an impact. And so before you do that, there's a question of, can we get to the place that would be a healthy, loving relationship? Let me add one other piece, that if people work on the issues in their relationship and they cannot resolve them, and they cannot resolve it in a way that brings a loving relationship, working on those issues helps them leave better. One of the effects of leaving poorly is continued conflict. And the kind of the illusion of divorce is, well, I won't have to deal with this person anymore. And in reality, in a post-divorce situation, many parents find that they suddenly have to communicate more than they have in years. They have to actually work things out, and they're stuck with this person that they still have the dynamics with. And now they're reactivated in even more conversations and more cooperation. And so whether you leave or go, dealing with those issues is incredibly important for the welfare of the kids and really for the mental health of both parents.
And I think what's really important for the listeners to know is there's lots of research out there that says, if parents are involved in a divorce, but they co-parent well, it's as if they were still married in terms of the effect on the kids. And I think that's really important. So, divorce doesn't have to be ugly, and the kids don't have to be put in the middle of it. And, life can go on, really beautifully. My next question for you is, let's say we have someone who's done a lot of soul searching. They've decided they want to make some changes and they want to adjust, and they really want to give the marriage one last try. What is a good path for them to go down? And feel free to add, some context from, the programs that you offer, whether you work directly with someone or they take, one of your courses or read one of your books.
Yeah. So let me point this in one way, that whether you stay or leave, there are some very common goals here. And so this helps us to start a conversation about this. One goal is clarity. Do I have clarity about who I need to be and what I would want in a relationship? And that is important to building or leaving. So clarity is important. So is intentionality. How am I going to be more intentional about how I'm interacting in this relationship more and more? And that is particularly important if you're trying to do some rebuilding, to be intentional about this, because you're changing habits of relating. And most people have gotten into habits of disconnection. And so now we're stepping into habits of connection. Another I think is important is integrity. I think most people know when they're out of their own integrity. And so for many people to be able to ask the question, how have I lost my own integrity in this conflict in our relationship? And how can I step back into it? Important either way, but it also begins to be an important process of starting again. Now let's getting practical. Not reacting from fear is incredibly important as a beginning point. Reactivity, period, is often drives the system that we've been talking about. So you're still reactive and you're still reacting to a spouse. And that's true either way. But if you're trying to rebuild, recognizing what triggers you, what puts you into dysregulation, to use the clinical term, and to find ways of calming yourself are very important, how to regulate. So to get practical after those pieces, I always suggest that people try to build connection by invitation. You can't make somebody connect with you, but you can be invitational. So here's a quick distinction. Many couples, when they find themselves in trouble, somebody announces that it's time to do date night. And most of the time, when somebody declares that they should be doing date night, there is not enough connection in the relationship to manage date night. My wife and I go out on plenty of dates, but we don't have to call it date night. We just are like, hey, let's go grab dinner and a movie. And yes, it's date night, but it happens organically because there's enough connection there. If you're disconnected and you're trying to force date night, first, there's a lot of feelings about that, of expectations, and what do you do with that? And so then let's try a different approach of something like, hey, I heard there's a new place up the road that has really good sandwiches. I was thinking about going there for lunch tomorrow. Would you like to go with me and try out the sandwich? That's an invitation. It's not, we're going to do this. It's a, would you like to? And if they say no, there is still an embedded level of connection. If somebody says to me, hey, would you like to go grab a cup of coffee or get a sandwich or whatever, even if I can't go, I feel warm about that. Wow, it's nice of them to ask. In a disconnected relationship, the first time you might be met with some skepticism, like, what are you trying to do? Trying to go try a sandwich. And if they don't want to go, you go try the sandwich. And if they do go, you have a light conversation. It's just inviting connection. That's a deposit. Sending a text to somebody saying, hey, I was thinking of you, hoping your day is going well. That requires no response. How was your day? What are you up to? What's going on? None of that, which requires a response back. There are ways of being invitational about the connection points. And that begins to set the frame that you're not demanding something. You're not trying to force something. You're not trying to get something from them. You're just trying to create a place where there could be some connection.
That is very, very powerful. So here's the last question before we start closing. I think there's something important that connects your work and mine, Lee. You're not telling people to stay at all costs. I'm not telling people to leave at all costs. We're both saying this: stop being passive, stop being reactive, get honest, get strategic, do the work, and make a real decision with real information. So the question is this: what is the cost of never actually deciding and staying in limbo indefinitely?
Exhaustion, for one, and for many people, regret. And so I have people who feel regret on two different fronts. One is that they stayed and stayed and stayed, and they never tried to improve things because now you can't go back and recapture time. So they have regret over not rebuilding. Then I have people who leave without trying, and they have regret that they didn't actually try. Regret is tough. There's no way to undo that feeling of regret. And so being able to recognize on the front side that limbo and leaving prematurely are both setups for that regret are incredibly taxing for somebody. And so taking action to try to rebuild to what you want is the answer to both. Let's see what's possible here. When people stay in limbo, the fact is, so when people often will say to me, I'll do anything if you can guarantee I can save my marriage. And my response is, I can't guarantee you can save your marriage, but I can guarantee what happens if you do not take action. You continue down this course. You already know where you're headed. That isn't getting you what you want. There is another option that at least help you determine what happens next.
Really, really helpful and powerful. Lee, I want to do something a little different for the close. I want each of us to speak directly to a listener who might be in their car right now, or lying in bed, or sitting in a parking lot after therapy. Someone who's in real pain and real confusion. Lee, you go first. What do you want to say to that person?
Yeah. So I would say if you're listening right now and you don't know whether to stay or go, You don't have to try to decide that today. This is not the moment that it has to happen. You need to understand what's actually happening. Most people don't fail because their marriage was impossible. They failed because they reacted instead of leading. So slow this down, get clear, then take one step in a better direction. The direction you can choose, but take it in a better direction and then see where the change begins.
Very, very powerful. You know, I would say, in addition to everything you said, take the time to actually think this through. Don't panic. Don't spiral. Don't crowdsource your decision from people who haven't lived your life and don't understand the consequences. Do the work, get good information, hire professionals, talk to people who've walked this road and come out with the wisdom, not just opinions, and then make a decision that you can stand with. Lee, thank you. This was a real powerful conversation, and I know it's going to help a lot of people think more clearly about one of the most important decisions of their lives. Lee, where can people find you?
It may not come as a surprise, but my website is savethemarriage.com. You can find me at savethemarriage.com. I've got links there, or you can use the information that's on the screen. Those are contact points for me. Save the Marriage is a program designed to help people take the next right step. That roadmap we've talked about several times, that point in hope, is often missing for people. And this is the roadmap. You still have to step in and take action, but you can find more at savethemarriage.com.
Fantastic. And for everyone listening, if this conversation resonated, here's what I'd love for you to do. First, if you're going through divorce or considering one, I want you to do it consciously with strategy and dignity. And you can visit me at www.reclaimandreboot.me. I offer a free 30-minute consultation where we can talk about where you are and what your next move should be. And if you want to save your marriage, please, please, please contact Lee. My books, U 2.0, Divorce a Better Way Forward, and the U 2.0 workbook are available on Amazon.com. They're practical, they're honest, and they help you build your strategy and to do the work on yourself that's really important. And this is not just temporary work. This is work that will help you in the long term. If this episode helped you, share it with someone who needs it. Not because I need the numbers, but because right now someone you know is sitting with this exact question and does not know where to turn. Subscribe to the Conscious Divorce Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. But before I go, let me leave you with this. You don't have to become hard to become wise. You don't have to become passive to become peaceful. You don't have to let fear make this decision for you. Whether you rebuild this marriage or move forward separately, the standard is the same. Consciousness, dignity, honesty, integrity, and care for yourself, for your partner, for your children, and for the life you're going to build next. The goal was never to avoid pain. The goal was always to move through it with open eyes and your integrity intact. I'm Justin Milrad. This is the Conscious Divorce Podcast. Take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you next time.